According to a news article by Damien Carrington for The Guardian, the world is on track for a hellish 3 degrees Celsius of global heating. The UN has warned before the crucial COP28 climate summit that begins next week in the United Arab Emirates. The report found that today's carbon-cutting policies are so inadequate that 3 degrees Celsius of heating would be reached this century. Temperature records have already been obliterated in 2023, and intensifying heat waves, floods, and droughts have taken lives and hit livelihoods across the globe in response to a temperature rise of 1.4 degrees Celsius to date. Scientists say far worse is to come if temperatures continue to rise. The Secretary-General of UN, António Guterres, has said repeatedly the world is heading for a hellish future. The UN Environment Programme report said that implementing future policies already promised by countries would shave 0.1 degrees Celsius off the 3 degrees Celsius limit. Putting in place emissions cuts pledged by developing countries on conditions of receiving financial and technical support would cut the temperature rise to 2.5 degrees Celsius, still a catastrophic scenario. To get on track for an internationally agreed target of 1.5 degrees Celsius, 22 billion tons of carbon dioxide must be cut from currently projected total in 2030, the report said. That is 42% of global emissions and equivalent to the output of world's 5 worst polluters: China, US, India, Russia, and Japan. Inger Anderson, the UNEP executive director, said that there is no person or economy left on the planet untouched by climate change, so we need to stop setting unwanted records on emissions, temperature, and extreme weather. We must instead lift the needle out of the same old groove of insufficient action and start setting other records on cutting emissions and on climate finance. Guterres said, present trends are racing our planet down a dead-end 3 degrees Celsius temperature rise. This is a failure of leadership, a betrayal of the vulnerable, and a massive missed opportunity. Renewables have never been cheaper or more accessible. We know it is still possible to make the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit a reality. It requires staring out the poisoned root of climate crisis, which is fossil fuels. He added, leaders must drastically up their game now with record ambition, record action, and record emissions reduction. No more greenwashing, no more foot dragging. Guterres said countries must commit at COP28 to triple renewable energy capacity by 2030 and to phasing out fossil fuels with a clear timeline. He said the recent climate agreement between China and US was a positive step, but that much more was needed to be done to restore trust between developed and developing countries after broken promises on delivering billions of dollars of climate aid. The UN warned earlier in November that the world's fossil fuel producers were planning expansions that would blow the planet's carbon budget twice over, which experts called insanity. Another recent report found that the state oil company of the UAE, whose CEO Sultan Al Jaber will preside over COP28, has the largest net zero busting expansion plans of any company in the world. The UNEP report, pointedly titled Broken Records, said that if all the long-term pledges by countries to cut emissions to net zero by 2050 were achieved, then the global temperature rise could be limited to 2 degrees Celsius. However, it concluded that these net zero pledges are not currently considered credible. None of the G20 countries, which together produce 80% of carbon dioxide, are reducing emissions at a pace consistent with their net zero targets. Another report from UN Climate Change, published on 14th November, reached virtually the same conclusion as the UNEP report. It found that existing national pledges to cut emissions would mean global emissions in 2030 were 2% below 2019 levels, rather than the 43% cut required to limit global heating to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Governments are taking baby steps to avert the climate crisis. They must make bold strides forward at COP28 in Dubai to get on track, said Simon Stryle, the Executive Secretary of UN Climate Change. Al Jaber said there is simply no time left for delays. COP28 must be a historic turning point in this critical decade for countries to seize the moment to commit to raise their ambition and to unite, act and deliver outcomes that keep 1.5 degrees Celsius within reach while leaving no one behind. Tom Mitchell, the executive director of the International Institute for Environment and Development, said, the world needs to take the brakes off when it comes to climate change. That means addressing deeply embedded aspects of the economic, legal, and financial status quo. The international investment regime protecting the interests of big oil is one example, he said, referring to the Energy Charter Treaty, a system of secret counts that enable companies to sue governments over climate policies that would cut their future profits. Treaties and contracts that favor fossil fuel investors are holding back to the green energy transition, even though we know most fossil fuel reserves must stay in the ground if we are to prevent catastrophic heating, Mitchell said. The treaties must be reformed if we want to cut emissions and keep as much Earth as possible habitable for our descendants.